Welcome once again to Destination Adventure. This week we'll follow the progress of intrepid traveller John O'Eakin as he makes his way west from Pakistan through to Iran. We'll join windsurf ace Bjorn Dunkerbeck as he searches for the best waves and the best diving off the idyllic islands of Fiji. And way off the beaten track in Indochina, we explore remote northern Laos by the best means possible, motorcycle. Now, a quick spin of the globe takes us east as we realise our long-held ambition and journey into the remote northern highlands of Laos. Mention Laos to a lot of people and they'll be hard-pushed to even pin it down to a continent. This little plot of old Indochina is sandwiched between Thailand in the west, Vietnam in the east, Cambodia south and China in the north. From Chiang Mai, the trip took us across the mighty Mekong to Hoi Sai, the northeast of Vientiane Phu Car and Lang Nam Ta, before bouncing off the Chinese border at Bo Tan and heading back. As mysterious as Indochina may appear to Westerners, if there's only one country which stands as the greatest enigma in this shady corner of the world, then it's Laos. Landlocked by its neighbours Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia and China, Laos, only in the last decade, has emerged largely unchanged from a long period of enforced isolation. Colonised, invaded, bombed to near oblivion and ravaged by internal power struggles, it's a country that's been described as having the face of a beautiful child, smiling innocently from behind deep and permanent scars. A French colony from the mid-19th century and occupied by the Japanese during the Second World War, the country gained its independence in 1949 and became the Kingdom of Laos. But stability was short-lived. The 1960s brought insurgency and the installation of a large covert American force, who, under the auspices of the CIA, hoped to reverse the communist tide. However, with the coming of the Vietnam War, Laos was engulfed in a secret extension of that bloody struggle, which saw the US drop more bombs on this tiny country than they released globally throughout World War II. Put in terms of the modern media, Laos was bombed back to the Stone Age. And some might unkindly say it never really left that era in the first place. It's a sparsely populated land, less a nation-state than a conglomeration of tribes and languages. A country where slash-and-burn subsistence agriculture is still the everyday way of life for a vast number of its peoples, and foreign aid accounts for nearly half of the state's income. Change, though, has been slowly creeping in. Fully open to tourism only in '96, a steady trickle of foreigners led by the backpacking Forward Guard is gradually broadening the Laotian population's experience of foreigners. But as a Westerner, you're still very much a rare animal indeed. Only a tiny proportion of the country's roads are sealed, hotels and guest houses are thin on the ground, and public transport is limited to the ever-present and, of course, overloaded Toyota pickup. So, don't come here expecting room service and a minibar. What you will get, however, is a guaranteed and privileged glimpse of one of the most beautiful and unspoilt countries anywhere in the world. And chances are, your welcome will be one of the warmest you've ever experienced. So, it pretty much goes without saying that we were keen to go and take a closer look for ourselves. What we needed was some means of getting there, and the help and advice of someone who knew the country well. We found both at our first port of call, Chiang Mai in the north of neighbouring Thailand. In a country where 80% of the roads are unsurfaced mountain tracks, two wheels are very often better than four. So, with the promise of independence way beyond that available to anyone dependent on public transport, we opted to cross into northern Laos by motorcycle, something our chosen party leader Resnikoff of Asian Motorcycle Adventures had plenty experience of.
It was around 8 years ago when it was my first solo motorcycle trip. I've already done a few motorcycle trips in Asia, Southeast Asia, but I was here just with a friend and we're having dinner at the restaurant overlooking the Mekong River. and we're looking across the Mekong River at just a few lights on the other side of the town of Hue Sai. And me and my friend, we just imagined how great it would be to one day be able to bring motorcycles across and drive into Laos. It was just so undeveloped, so raw.
Reed was to be ably assisted on this trip by David Unkovich, whose 17 years of experience in the region and fluent Thai was to prove invaluable. We asked him about his first trip into Laos.
That was a pretty amazing adventure. Took 2 years to get the permits to get in. No one knew how good or bad the roads were. You'd ask someone how far it is and they couldn't give an answer. Fuel, sometimes you couldn't get fuel, you had to buy it in little bottles and top up your bike that way. But the people are still basically the same. They're still very warm and friendly. You can eat and sleep anywhere. They always welcome you and they're always happy to see foreigners come in. What's scary or worrisome is that if you have an accident, there's no medical facilities. If you stuff up, you're in deep trouble. They don't even have x-ray facilities. You've got to get yourself out somehow. So you're basically on your own, and it's a pretty serious adventure. It gives you a buzz. It's great, I love it.
Just go round the left, down top of the road to the highway.
Well, the buzz would be nice, but the risks were always a consideration, not the least that of negotiating Chiang Mai's crazy traffic before we could head northeast to the border with Laos. Reed Resnikoff talks us through the journey.
We start off 7:30 in the morning around, and it's rush hour for Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is the third largest city in Thailand. We're going to take a little ride around the old city, which is within a moat area, and then run out to the superhighway. As soon as we get on the superhighway, it'll clear up and be more normal, and then we head into the mountains. These mountains are the foothills of the Himalayas. We're going to go up 1 or 2 mountain passes, back down into the valley. These valleys are the major rice growing areas in Thailand, and we keep on heading north through another small city called Chiang Rai, which also used to be a ancient capital like Chiang Mai at one time. We're going to have lunch right at the Mekong River. First time we'll see it on this trip. And around 10 kilometers after that, we come to the apex of the Golden Triangle.
The rather romantically named Golden Triangle is the point where Thailand, Burma and Laos meet on a lazy bend of the Mekong. This, for centuries, was the heart of production of Indochina's biggest cash crop, opium. These remote northern hillsides providing fertile conditions for the tall poppies far away from the prying eyes of officialdom. Just a few miles south on the Mekong itself lay our point of departure from Thailand, Chiang Khong, where we knew a long wait lay in store as the Thai customs officials struggled with the paperwork for the bikes. As Reed explains, it's rarely a straightforward business.
It gets a little tricky going through customs, not immigration. Immigration is the only thing you need is a passport. But customs, we're doing something very unusual, is riding motorcycles all over Southeast Asia. It's possible, but they just really don't know the procedures. They have to look into their code books, call up other border crossings for information, how to handle it. It all sorts out eventually, but it depends how hard they want to work that day.
And as luck had it, the customs guys were quickly on the case. A few phone calls here and there, an hour or so of form filling in triplicate, and the odd bottle of scotch carefully placed in the right hands, and the job was complete. So, having almost settled on spending one last night in Thailand as the dreaded paperwork was sorted, it was a pleasant surprise indeed to ride the bikes onto the ferry and, as evening light began to descend, slowly ply the waters of the Mekong across the Laotian port of Hue Sai. Immigration and customs once in Laos proved to be little more than a 10-minute formality. So with the sun finally down behind the hills of Thailand across the Mekong in the west, our first taste of Laos was to be that of its one and only brand of beer. Not too many though. The next day's ride east into the heavily wooded mountains of Bokeo province was going to be a tough one. The crisp morning light of a brand new day revealed the first of many contrasts Laos was to provide. After the bustling streets of Thailand, Hue Sai's almost total lack of traffic took a little getting used to. In fact, with the exception of the odd pickup and the usual gaggle of mopeds, our 6 bikes were virtually the only vehicles on the town's roads. But with 150 kilometres of dirt between us and our planned overnight stop in Vieng Phu Ka, there was little time to waste. Our exclusive use of the road didn't last for long though. 80 k's inland, a vast open-cast coal mine feeds a fleet of heavy trucks, hauling coal back and forth to barges waiting on the Mekong. And getting past these heavily laden monsters on the twisting mountain tracks was neither easy or particularly pleasant. The huge clouds of dust they created didn't do the bikes a whole lot of good either. And with all 6 coughing and spluttering, Joe, our travelling mechanic, took on his first job of the trip, cleaning out a series of hopelessly blocked air cleaners. Filters unblocked and the trucks thankfully behind us, we could, at long last, really relax and start to enjoy some of the most beautiful roads any of us had experienced. This, believe it or not, is what they rather generously call National Highway Number 3, the main road from northern Thailand up through Laos and beyond to both China and Vietnam. If the long talked-of bridge is ever completed across the Mekong from Chiang Khong to Hue Sai, the Thai authorities have promised to fund the upgrading of the road, which could of course prove to be a mixed blessing for the local population. Our first encounters with them, as Jeff Pike explains, were encouraging.
The people are so friendly. My lasting impression is going to be the kids riding through these villages, and the kids just swarm out onto the road whenever you stop the bikes, and they're a little bit shy and apprehensive to start off with, but when you show them something, or you get down on your hands and knees and sit down with them, they come up to you and you hold your hand out and they shake your hand. Can't understand a word they're saying. I know one word, sabadi, but it's been fantastic.
While those language difficulties were to come to the fore only a little while later, as darkness fell we emerged from the depths of the forest down into Vieng Phu Ka, a tiny little outpost of a town where the only lights came from the occasional cooking fire. But our arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. No sooner had we pulled up than the town's one and only doctor came to enlist our help. That evening he was taking a class of teenagers for English lessons, so what better than to get some native speakers up there in front of the blackboard. The task fell to Greg Mackenzie.
I come from England.
I think when we pulled into the village the night before last, it was pitch black. As soon as we arrived, people started to turn their generators on. And then we heard that there was a school up on the hill that had some English lessons, so we popped up there, and unfortunately I was the first through the door, so I think I got pushed to the front and shown to the shown to the blackboard and started to teach some very inquiring minds. And again, it's the children, and it's the optimism. People were looking at us thinking, these guys were learning English by candlelight, but there was no resentment. They were very happy with their lot, and they're all trying to achieve.
Well, Greg the teacher becomes Greg the stunt rider as he tackles the hidden delights of Laotian roads. That's after the break. Back in Laos, and the convoy was heading ever deeper into the sparsely populated hills and forests of the country's northern highlands. A chance encounter tour leaders Dave and Reed had had with a villager on an exploratory ride here in the previous year had planted a seed. He'd told them of the ruins of an ancient city lost deep in the woods, and despite all their attempts to research the claim, neither of them had been able to come up with any reference to the place. So, this time around, the hunt was really on. If there were any remains of the city, then they wanted to see them for themselves. Only a few kilometres east of Viangpuka, we stopped once again in the village where they'd first heard of what could prove to be an important archaeological site. Not all the locals appeared to share our enthusiasm for the search, however, adding credence to a snippet David heard about the site being cursed in some way. Nevertheless, 2 or 3 were eventually persuaded.
This is it right here?
The forest closed in around us, but nothing became immediately evident. Was there likely to be anything left, or had the place been entirely stripped and lost to the undergrowth? Despite Dave's language skills, communications weren't entirely straightforward.
It's been difficult trying to get information off them because they speak their own dialect. I speak Thai. Thai and Lao is 70% the same, but there's some words we can't quite work out. Otherwise, it's going okay. We'll get there.
What we were getting was evidence of some pretty major earthworks. A gently curving deep ditch with steep banks on either side was choked with trees, but unmistakable nevertheless.
We've been walking around an old wall, and there's moats around it. There's 2 gates either side where people used to go in and out. We've been to one of the gates already. The other gate is somewhere over this way.
Following the moat around the perimeter of the site, one of the villagers who'd lived as a child just on the edge of the woods thought he might know where to find the remains of what he'd been told by his grandparents had been the city's temple. We weren't to be disappointed.
What we found here are the ruins over here. This is the ruins of an old temple, the temple wall. As far as we can gather, the people abandoned the city. I can't quite determine why. Some of the locals say it's jinx, they won't come here. These guys seem to be okay. There's always been a civilization here. They say it's got to be 300 or 400 years old, but nobody really knows. There's very little information.
From what we'd seen, 300 or 400 years had to be a fairly conservative estimate. A few bricks piled up in a mound deep in the forests of northern Laos may not look a lot, but a full archaeological study of the site could reveal a hell of a lot more. The villagers told us that we were the first Westerners to have visited the site, certainly in their lifetime. So whether or not this site is known of is difficult to tell. We will, of course, report our findings and pass them on to the experts. All that talk of a curse and the villagers' reluctance to go anywhere near the site had, at first, been a source of some amusement to the group. Scepticism, however, began to wane only minutes after our departure. Fuel stops this far up country are haphazard affairs. A couple of barrels, a hand pump and an attendant who has to come from his work out in the fields to serve you. He was happy enough, but the smiles on our faces disappeared minutes later. 650cc 4-stroke motorcycles rarely run very well on diesel, and our grinning gas man had just topped the whole lot off with truck fuel. Time for Joe to get back to work again, draining tanks, stripping carbs and generally saying some very nasty things about a certain gas station attendant. As he explained, this is fairly typical.
Laos is actually something different altogether again. If you come on your own bike, you need to be prepared for this country, because there's actually no mechanics to be had over there, no good ones, so spare parts non-existent. You just make sure your bike is in top condition, and you should know everything about your bike. In case you do run into trouble, you can fix it yourself. Carry the spare parts you would need for this particular bike, because if you do get into trouble, there is nobody to help you out there.
Well, what we had learned is that petrol, certainly in this part of Laos, is a red colour, and diesel, well, diesel here looks more or less like petrol does in most other countries. Confused? You will be. Bike car companies in Thailand are generally unenthusiastic about customers taking their bikes out of the country. So unless you come here like us with a tour group, you'll have to bring your own bike. Ours were ideal for the job. 650cc Aprilia dual-purpose machines, they were as happy off-road as they were on. Conditions here in the dry season mean you could possibly get by with a robust road bike, but the slightest hint of rain turns these dusty tracks into a slippery quagmire, and off-road tyres are a must. River crossings are frequent and occasionally deep, and despite the lack of traffic on the road, when you do encounter it, it's almost invariably on a blind bend with little or no room to squeeze past. So it goes without saying that should you fancy the freedom that your own bike offers you here, you've got to wear the gear that'll protect you if the worst comes to the worst. Protective pants, jacket, a good quality helmet, goggles or visor, and as Greg Mackenzie found out, a proper pair of boots. Maybe that lost city curse hadn't finished with us after all.
You alright?
Which is a good sign.
Hey, you alright?
No.
No, there's nothing broken?
No, you're fine.
There are holes in the road, and holes in the road Laos style. 4 of us managed to avoid it, but Greg wasn't so fortunate.
Riding over here is a challenge. As you know, I had a bit of an accident yesterday, which, you know, there was a 2-foot, 3-foot hole. You know, and when I say hole, it's a hole. You can see daylight underneath it in the middle of the road. Actually, you know, right on the line which I was taking. And by the time I could to get up to it, it was just too late. I couldn't do anything about it. I tried to take the bike through it. Realised that the thing was then going to go over the edge. So, and having been staring at that edge for the last sort of previous 10 minutes, I decided a good thing to do is to get away from the bike. So I actually sort of consciously pushed away from the bike and just happened to find a nice welcoming tree trunk to grab hold of as I went over. You know, the bike actually sort of landed on my leg as I was going over the edge, and you know, if I hadn't been wearing the proper boots, I could well have had a broken leg in the middle of nowhere, probably a day's drive out of Thailand. That would have been a very painful 24 hours for me, but of course you don't appreciate that until afterwards.
And again. Yay!
So the bike pretty much intact and only a few minor dents in Greg's pride, the journey resumed. The delay of that little trip down the mountainside meant we were up against it time-wise. Our next objective had been an investigative little trip north of the Chinese border before heading back south for the overnight stop in Lang Nang Ta. To squeeze it all in, we'd need to step up the pace. Finally pulling up in Botan, a grubby little border village which, like border towns everywhere, looked less than inviting. We grabbed the opportunity of a quick break, a quick drink, and a little late lunch.
What was it?
The selection of foodstuffs available ranged from the unspeakable through to the inedible. These, should you ever wish to know, are barbecued chicks on a stick.
That's a hard bit.
While this, well, let's just say it once belonged to a porcupine. And yes, the porcupine did take its revenge. Internal discomfort ensued just a few hours later. Trying to cross into China for a quick look was always going to be a long shot, but we'd come this far, so if you don't ask, you don't get. Dave's powers of persuasion seemed to be doing the trick at first, but unfortunately they wouldn't overcome the rule book. Yes, we could go into China, but only if we first got the permission to leave Laos. And that meant getting paperwork from the government in Vientiane, 500 kilometers south. So, satisfied with getting close enough to press our noses up against the glass, so to speak, we went for a quick photo opportunity, then, once again, hit the road. At the end of a long day, pulling up at the boat landing just outside Lang Nam Tar was exactly what everyone needed. Built and run by a young Laotian architect, the boat landing is one of a tiny handful of traditionally built guest houses in northern Laos. Perched idyllically on the banks of the slow-flowing Nam Tar River, it prides itself on its Laotian food, Laotian beer and Laotian music, all of which added up to a concluding evening's entertainment, which couldn't have been much better.
None of the people realize or have any idea what they're going to see and experience when they come to a place like Laos. They have no idea what's there. It's a different world, different universe entirely. They realize that there's a world out there beyond shopping malls, beyond fast food restaurants, beyond superhighways, where people are still living to the rhythms of nature, where they're getting all their needs from the fruits of the forest. And for them to see that and experience it firsthand is an experience that they'll never forget and take home, and they will share it with their friends and families.
I think really what's staggering is we're sitting on, bikes that are made very recently. Beautiful bikes, beautiful equipment, riding through places that are really dating back to medieval times. We were talking about what year we'd have to go back to in order to figure out when was the West like this? And some of those villages we were in yesterday and the day before, those kids, it's amazing, completely different. I'm sure that it was, 1400, something like that, amazing.
What we've seen on this tour, and the other tours you'll see the next few years, it's a vanishing sort of culture. It'll go completely in 10 years. They can't hang on like that. There's going to be, asphalt roads, there's going to be highways there, electricity, telephones. The people are finding out what the real world's like there. And their culture is disappearing fast, and it's very difficult for them to keep control of that. It has to change, and for them to catch up, it has to change very, 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 very fast.
The geography and the terrain is so beautiful, the mountains and the virgin rainforests and the wild rivers tumbling through the valleys. But I think what everybody enjoys the most on this trip are the Laotian people, the villages. Everyone we pass waves to us and cheers and comes running out when they hear the motorcycles coming by, and just the friendliness and the curiosity of the local Laotians. I think that's what everybody will remember most from this trip.
We crossed into Laos from Chiang Kong in northern Thailand, and 4 other entry points are open to foreigners crossing the Mekong. Only one, the Friendship Bridge, issues visas however, so get yours from a Lao embassy in advance. Flights run regularly from Bangkok to the capital Vientiane. For all the bike travel info you could possibly need, visit the website Golden Triangle Rider, where you'll find links to all the experts you'll need. Well, that's it for this show. Join us again soon for more travel on the edge with Destination Adventure.